Hello, I'm Gregor, and in this video I want to show you how to mount the Viro crank AmEn1. For this we need the following tools: a bottom bracket tool, a 2mm 2.5 and 8mm Allen key, a slotted screwdriver, a crank extractor in case there is an older model crank on your bike, shift cable, cable ties, a chain, a greaser and degreaser, cable end crimps, and end caps for the bottom. As a first step, I want to explain to you the correct spacing of the cranks and the bottom bracket bearing. If you have unpacked the bottom bracket bearing, you can take it apart and you will find three 2.5mm spacers on it. Also, you will find two bigger 0.5mm thick spacers and four smaller, also 0.5mm thick spacers. There are two different actuation platforms, one for the ISCG mount and the other one for BSA mounting. For BSA mounting, we take the two bigger spacers and put them on the bottom bracket bearing. Please pay attention that you always take the one which is marked with an R for right. Put it on the platform and mount it to the frame. For the ISCG mount, you mount the actuation platform directly to the frame, and the correct spacing is done by putting one of the 2.5mm black spacers onto the bottom bracket bearing and thread it into the frame. Then, in both cases, you take the crank and put it into the frame and mount it by tightening the left crank arm. Now I will show you how to mount the actuation bases to the frame. First, we have to get rid of the grease on the frame interface by using a degreaser and swiping it off. Then we take the bottom bracket bearing and put on the two bigger spacers. Slide it through the actuation platform and put on some grease on the thread. Now we can start screwing it in counterclockwise, right in the direction of the arrow printed on the bearing. Keep the platform or the bases in a center position unless it has at least some seat, and try to align the screw holes from the ISCG interface, in this case with the holes in the bases. Now we tighten it with the bottom bracket tool with approximately 40 to 50 Newton meters. When mounting the actuation bases directly to the frame, we need to pay attention that sometimes the surface of the bottom bracket is not on the same height as the surface of the ISCG points. You can see it here. There is a difference in the height. We try to get rid of this difference by using these washers as spacers and adding them on these spots. We just put in the two bolts, but do not tighten them. As soon as the second one is in, we can tighten both of them. When using the packed by BSA bottom bracket bearing, we slide on one of the black spacers and use some grease for the thread and screw it in counterclockwise. And tighten it with the bottom bracket tool with 40 to 50 Newton meters. In case you have a frame without ISCG mounting points, you can take a cord or line and place it from the center of the bottom bracket bearing to the center of the rear wheel axis, like this. Then you rotate the actuation plate so that in the end it is in a position where the center point of this element is about 5 to 7 millimeters below the line. Now we can slide in the crank into the bottom bracket bearing, but please take care of the correct spacing in between the crank, the moving unit, and the actuator, the standing unit. Put on as much spacer to ensure that the highest point or the most inner point of the crank here has a distance to the highest point of the fixed unit here of about 1 to 1.5 millimeters when it is actually mounted. For mounting the pedals on the crank, we need these inserts to put them into the crank from behind, either in this or in this position, whether you want it with 175 or 170 millimeters of length. Also, please take care that you take the right insert for the right crank arm and the left insert for the left crank arm. Then you need to put this washer on the pedal and start screwing in. Please take care that the washer is really sliding into the crank when tightening the pedal. Tighten it with 47 to 54 Newton meters. Now I want to show you the height adjustment of the so-called nose, this plastic part right here. It is responsible to guide the chain into the chain line when the first segment is swiveled in and you're running at the rear cassette on one of the biggest chain rings. Now you need to loosen the bolt on the rear of the nose. Then you can adjust the height. The right height of the nose is when the first cock of the segment touches the chain and is lifted, it needs to get in contact with the nose. This is how it has to be if the chain is running on the biggest sprocket of the cassette and you're sitting on your bike, because if it is a full suspension bike, the chain line will change when the bike is under load. It is normal that the chain is in permanent contact with the nose when you're running the chain on one of the two biggest sprockets of the rear cassette, because this is a not usual shifting situation. Also, please pay attention to the chain length. For this we need to switch on the biggest sprocket at the crank and on the biggest sprocket at the cassette. Then we need to have a proper chain tension, but not too much, so that the derailleur is running like this. At the other extreme, when we are running on the small sprocket at the front and on the small sprocket at the rear cassette, there has to be still some chain tension. Now we bring the cable through the actuation lever through the spring. Pull it to make it sit proper, and then take the smaller orifice to the top, slide the cable through it and pull it through it. Make sure that the spring is back in its seat. Then pull on the cable to have some tension and tighten it. Then check if it is working. And cut it off. And put on a cable end crimp. For mounting the left crank arm, we will also need spacers to compensate tolerances in the length of the BB housing. Here I'm using one of the spacers. Put on the crank arm on the spindle and tighten it gentle. As soon as it starts sitting more strong, you tighten it fully with 45 to 55 Newton meters. Your Viro crank is ready for your ride.